Former Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reed had lived in near-total isolation for 4 years in a remote cabin outside Bend, Oregon, 40 acres of dense wilderness that served simultaneously as sanctuary from civilization and prison for his psychological trauma. At 43 years old, Marcus had left the Navy SEALs after a hostage rescue mission in Syria, where he was forced to make an impossible tactical decision under extreme time pressure: breach the compound immediately to save 3 hostages who were being executed in real time, or wait for proper support assets and risk losing all hostages before reinforcements arrived. He breached with his 4-man team. 2 adult hostages survived with minor injuries. 1 died in the crossfire, an 8-year-old Syrian girl struck by rounds from hostile forces during the chaotic room clearing. The child's face haunted every moment Marcus closed his eyes. Her eyes, brown, terrified, looking directly at him in her final seconds, appeared in every nightmare, every quiet moment, every time he tried to sleep. The Navy's investigation cleared him completely. Tactically sound decision under extreme circumstances, with incomplete intelligence and immediate threat to hostage lives. But Marcus couldn't clear himself of responsibility. The official exoneration meant nothing compared to the weight of seeing a child die during an operation he commanded. PTSD affected 11–20% of veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan operations, with symptoms including intrusive memories, flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and difficulty regulating emotions. Marcus experienced all documented symptoms with crushing intensity, particularly intrusive thoughts about the Syria mission that invaded his consciousness without warning, triggered by random stimuli he couldn't predict or control. He took retirement immediately after completing required debriefings, bought 40 acres of isolated land that no one visited, and stopped answering communications from anyone who knew him before Syria. The transition from active military service to civilian life was known to cause significant transitional stress, with 44–72% of returning service members experiencing high stress levels. Marcus's isolation represented an extreme coping mechanism, removing himself completely from social environments that triggered anxiety and panic attacks. His only companion was Odin, a 10-year-old German shepherd who'd been Marcus's K-9 partner for 5 deployments spanning Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Odin had taken shrapnel during the same Syria mission, metal fragments embedded in his hindquarters, creating chronic pain and leaving him partially deaf from blast exposure near his right ear. When Marcus isolated himself in the Oregon wilderness, Odin stayed, not out of duty or training, but out of the same understanding that comes from shared trauma. German shepherds were known for exceptional loyalty and strong bonding with handlers, particularly after combat experiences that created psychological connections beyond typical human-animal relationships. They coexisted in silence most days, 2 damaged warriors who communicated through physical proximity rather than words, both struggling with psychological ghosts that didn't fade with time or isolation. Marcus survived financially on VA disability payments rated at 70%, occasional odd jobs he could complete without human interaction, firewood splitting, land clearing for neighbors he never met, and the vegetable garden he maintained with obsessive focus that represented the only activity keeping his hands busy enough to quiet his intrusive thoughts. His closest neighbor lived 7 miles away. He had no phone service, deliberately chosen to prevent contact. The only visitors were delivery drivers who left packages at his locked gate and drove away quickly because Marcus's body language and physical demeanor communicated "do not engage" with unmistakable clarity. This isolation was deliberate, necessary for managing his PTSD symptoms and slowly killing him psychologically. But it represented what Marcus believed was better than the alternative of being around people when panic attacks struck without warning in crowded environments. On a freezing February night, when temperatures dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, Marcus was chopping firewood behind his cabin at 2200 hours. The chronic insomnia that plagued PTSD sufferers made him work at odd hours when physical exhaustion might finally allow sleep. Odin, who usually slept through Marcus's late-night labor despite his deafness, suddenly erupted into aggressive, alerting behavior, barking despite his impaired hearing, the vibration in his throat providing feedback that he was vocalizing. Body rigid in the tactical alert posture Marcus recognized from hundreds of operational scenarios, focused attention directed toward the tree line approximately 50 yards from the cabin. Marcus's tactical instincts activated immediately, despite 4 years of isolation. Odin didn't produce false alerts. In 8 years of operational work, spanning 5 combat deployments, the German Shepherd had never once indicated a threat that wasn't genuinely present. Marcus grabbed his powerful tactical flashlight and moved toward the tree line with Odin leading, despite the dog's pronounced limp being overridden by urgency. 20 yards into the woods, Marcus's light caught something that stopped his breathing. A boy, approximately 9 years old, collapsed in the snow wearing only jeans and a thin hoodie. No coat, no shoes, blood visible on his face and arms, not moving. Marcus's combat medic training overrode his isolation and PTSD symptoms immediately. He dropped beside the child and checked for pulse, weak but present, approximately 40 beats per minute. Breathing, shallow, irregular, indicating respiratory distress. Core, temperature, dangerously low based on skin temperature and lack of shivering response. The boy was severely hypothermic, injured, and would die within minutes if left exposed to 15-degree temperatures. Marcus lifted the child. He weighed perhaps 60 pounds, all bones and visible malnutrition, even through clothing, his body limp and cold, and ran toward his cabin with Odin clearing the path ahead through snow. Inside the cabin, Marcus began aggressive hypothermia treatment protocols from his combat medic training, stripped the wet clothing that was leaching heat, wrapped the boy in multiple wool blankets, positioned him near the wood stove, radiating heat, monitored vital signs continuously. The boy's lips were blue, indicating cyanosis. His fingers showed early frostbite damage. Multiple bruises in various stages of healing covered his torso and arms. Defensive wounds, belt marks, circular burns consistent with cigarette contact. Marcus's tactical assessment was immediate. This child didn't get accidentally lost in the woods during a winter hike. He was either running from something life-threatening or someone had deliberately thrown him out here to die from exposure, murder disguised as a tragic accident. At 23:40 hours, the boy regained consciousness. His first reaction was pure panic, thrashing violently despite hypothermia, trying to escape despite having nowhere to go, whimpering, please don't hurt me," in a voice that broke through Marcus's emotional numbness and triggered every protective instinct he thought he'd lost in Syria. Odin moved to the boy's side and did something Marcus hadn't witnessed in years. The German shepherd lay down beside the child, placed his head gently on the boy's chest, and made the low rumbling sound he'd used with injured teammates during deployment. A comfort behavior that communicated, "You're safe, warrior down, we've got you." The boy's panic subsided gradually. His eyes, brown, terrified, aged far beyond 9 years, locked onto Odin first, then drifted cautiously to Marcus. "Are you going to hurt me?" he whispered through chattering teeth. Marcus, whose voice sounded strange even to himself after days of self-imposed silence, said the only thing that mattered. "No, you're safe here. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, evaluating whether Marcus was telling truth, then responded, "Caleb. I'm Caleb Henderson. I ran away. He said he was going to kill me this time, so I ran." Over the next hour, while Marcus treated Caleb's hypothermia and documented injuries using his combat medic training, the boy's story emerged in broken fragments punctuated by shivering and tears. Caleb Henderson, age 9, had been in Oregon's foster care system for 2 years following his mother's death from drug overdose. His current placement was with Dennis Morrison, a licensed foster parent who presented himself professionally as a devoted single man, dedicated to saving troubled children from difficult circumstances. The reality was horrifically different. Morrison was a predator who specifically requested placement of boys with documented behavioral issues, children whose testimony wouldn't be believed by authorities because they were already labeled as problems by the system. Morrison had been systematically abusing Caleb for 8 months, severe beatings with belts and closed fists, deliberate starvation as punishment, isolation in a basement for days, escalating violence that Caleb knew with certainty would eventually turn fatal. 2 nights ago, Morrison had told Caleb he was done dealing with the trouble and drove him 40 miles into wilderness, dumped him on a remote logging road in freezing temperatures, wearing only summer clothes, and left him to die from exposure. Murder, carefully disguised as a runaway child who tragically got lost and succumbed to hypothermia. Caleb had walked for 2 days, progressively more disoriented and hypothermic, surviving on snow for hydration and nothing for food, until he collapsed near Marcus's property line. Odin found him approximately 20 minutes before he would have died from hypothermia-induced cardiac arrest. Marcus listened with ice forming in his chest, his PTSD symptoms temporarily suppressed by the immediate tactical situation. This was the Syria girl all over again, a child in mortal danger, someone who was supposed to protect them becoming the threat, a choice Marcus had to make about intervention under extreme circumstances. But this time, there was no SEAL team, no support assets, no official military authority backing his decisions, just a broken former operator who didn't trust his own judgment, a combat dog who never stopped detecting threats, and a 9-year-old boy whose life depended entirely on what happened in the next few hours. Marcus had no phone service by deliberate choice. His nearest neighbor was 7 miles away through snow. Caleb was in no medical condition to travel. His core temperature remained dangerously low at 94 degrees, and moving him before stabilization could cause cardiac arrest from cold shock. But Dennis Morrison knew Caleb might have survived exposure. He would be searching, and when he discovered a former SEAL was harboring his runaway foster kid, Morrison would come with law enforcement, falsified reports about Caleb's severe behavioral issues, and legal parental authority that Marcus couldn't fight without substantial evidence. Marcus made a tactical decision based on SEAL operational planning. He needed comprehensive evidence before confrontation was inevitable. While Caleb slept, Odin maintaining protective position beside the boy with professional vigilance. Marcus used his satellite internet connection to research Dennis Morrison thoroughly. What he found confirmed every tactical instinct. Morrison had fostered 12 boys over 6 years through Oregon's overburdened system. 3 were officially listed as runaways never found, cold cases that received minimal investigation. 2 were returned to the foster system with reports documenting severe behavioral deterioration requiring specialized placement. 7 boys were currently in Morrison's home. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone with investigative training. Morrison was a predator systematically using the foster care system to access vulnerable children, then either breaking them into terrified compliance or disposing of those who resisted through methods designed to avoid detection. The critical turning point came at 600 hours when Marcus heard a vehicle approaching his property, highly unusual because no one came to his isolated cabin uninvented. Through his window, Marcus observed a county sheriff's deputy vehicle and a civilian car. Dennis Morrison stepped out with Deputy Paul Crawford, both moving toward Marcus's door with the confidence of people who believed they possessed authority and truth. Morrison's strategy was tactically predictable. Report Caleb as a disturbed runaway with documented history of false accusations and attention-seeking behavior. Claim Marcus was an unstable veteran who was confused about circumstances due to PTSD. Use the deputy's authority to recover Caleb before the boy could tell anyone the complete truth. What Morrison didn't know, Marcus Reed wasn't confused, unstable, or unprepared. He was a SEAL who'd spent 4 years in isolation developing contingency plans for every conceivable scenario, because tactical planning was the only activity that quieted his Syria memories. When Deputy Crawford knocked, Marcus answered with Caleb standing beside him, cleaned, fed, wearing Marcus's clothing, and most importantly, everything had been recorded. Marcus had been filming since Morrison's vehicle appeared on his property security camera system. He'd comprehensively documented Caleb's injuries with photographs and measurements, recorded the boy's complete testimony on video, and live-streamed everything to a secure cloud server because operational security meant redundant backups. Morrison attempted his rehearsed speech. "Deputy, thank God you found him. Caleb has serious behavioral issues, runs away constantly, makes up elaborate stories for attention. We've been worried sick since he disappeared. We just want to take him home, where he's safe." But Marcus didn't respond to Morrison. He addressed Deputy Crawford directly with SEAL command presence. "Deputy Crawford, this child has belt marks, cigarette burns, and signs of prolonged malnutrition consistent with deliberate starvation. He was found hypothermic 40 yards from my property line, wearing summer clothes in 15-degree weather. His sworn statement is that Dennis Morrison drove him to a logging road and abandoned him with intent to cause death from exposure. I have comprehensive medical documentation, photographs, and video testimony. I've also discovered that 3 boys previously in Morrison's care are listed as missing persons. I'm invoking mandatory reporting laws under Oregon revised statutes. This is suspected child abuse and attempted murder, and I'm not releasing this child to his documented abuser." Morrison's face went pale. Deputy Crawford, young, perhaps 26, inexperienced but not corrupt, suddenly looked uncertain about the situation he'd been manipulated into. Morrison tried to recover. "He's lying, Deputy. Caleb does this constantly for attention. I have extensive documentation of his behavioral issues from multiple professionals. But Marcus played his final tactical card. Then you won't mind if Child Protective Services conducts an immediate inspection of your home and forensic interviews with the 7 boys currently in your care. I've already contacted CPS, Oregon State Police, and the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. They're en route to this location. Marcus was bluffing. He had no phone service and hadn't contacted anyone yet. But his SEAL training included tactical deception operations, and his tone carried absolute confidence born from decades of operational experience. Morrison broke under pressure. He lunged toward Caleb, attempting to physically grab the boy before the situation escalated further and his crimes were exposed. That's when Odin moved with professional precision. The German Shepherd's defensive bite was controlled, calculated, took Morrison's extended arm in a grip designed for pain compliance rather than maximum tissue damage. Deputy Crawford drew his weapon reflexively, shouting commands, but Marcus remained calm, with hands visible. "Deputy, that man just committed assault by attempting to forcibly seize a child who's reported him for abuse and attempted murder. My service dog intervened to protect a minor from imminent harm. Lower your weapon and call Child Protective Services immediately. Do your job." Crawford, overwhelmed and recognizing he was in a situation far beyond his experience level, made the call. Oregon State Police arrived within 30 minutes. CPS arrived within an hour. Caleb's injuries were documented by medical professionals using forensic photography and examination protocols. Morrison was arrested when forensic examination of his home revealed extensive evidence of systematic abuse. Restraints in the basement, documentation showing deliberate food deprivation, and digital evidence on Morrison's computer that led to federal charges far worse than abuse. Trafficking, exploitation images, and communications with a network of predators operating through foster care systems. The 7 boys currently in Morrison's care were removed immediately into protective custody. 2 of the 3 runaways were eventually located through expanded investigation, 1 in a human trafficking situation, 1 buried in a shallow grave. The full scope of Morrison's crimes unfolded over weeks. He'd been operating for 6 years, systematically destroying children and exploiting the foster care system's overburdened infrastructure to avoid detection. Dennis Morrison faced 37 felony charges, including attempted murder, aggravated child abuse, human trafficking, and production of child sexual abuse material. He received a 40-year federal sentence with no possibility of parole before serving 35 years. The investigation expanded to include 2 other foster parents in Morrison's predator network, leading to 12 additional arrests across Oregon and Washington. Oregon's foster care system underwent emergency reform, implementing comprehensive new oversight protocols specifically designed to prevent predators from exploiting systemic vulnerabilities that Morrison had manipulated. Caleb entered specialized trauma care with a carefully vetted foster family screened through CPS's reformed protocols, but he refused to engage meaningfully in therapy sessions until they allowed Odin to visit. The German Shepherd's presence, his patient stillness, his protective positioning beside Caleb, his refusal to leave the boy's side, became the foundation of Caleb's psychological recovery. CPS made an unprecedented arrangement. Odin was certified as Caleb's therapy animal, with Marcus granted visitation rights as the dog's handler, requiring his presence during therapy sessions. Over 6 months, Marcus visited Caleb 3 times weekly, bringing Odin for therapy sessions that gradually evolved beyond clinical settings. Marcus taught Caleb woodworking using hand tools, basic survival skills appropriate for a 9-year-old, and the controlled routines that helped manage trauma symptoms. Caleb asked questions Marcus could actually answer without triggering his Syria memories, not about combat or guilt or operational failures, but about dogs, constellations, how to properly start a fire, why Odin limped, what different trees were called. Simple things that didn't trigger panic attacks, healing things that worked therapeutically for both of them. The visits forced Marcus out of his 4-year isolation. He started attending VA therapy again, not because he was suddenly cured or his Syria guilt had disappeared, but because Caleb asked directly if Marcus talked to someone about the nightmares he obviously experienced. "You help me every week," Caleb said. "Who helps you?" It was the most effective therapy referral Marcus had ever received, a 9-year-old child asking why Marcus didn't practice what he preached about seeking help. 1 year after finding Caleb collapsed in the snow, Marcus had moved from his isolated 40-acre property to a smaller 10-acre parcel closer to Bend. He'd completed a 90-day residential PTSD treatment program at the VA, maintained regular weekly therapy appointments, and worked part-time with Oregon's search and rescue teaching wilderness survival skills to volunteers. Caleb's foster family lived 3 miles away, allowing daily visits that had evolved into informal mentorship. Marcus taught Caleb and 2 other foster children from Morrison's case, forming an unofficial program that gave damaged children a safe male role model and gave Marcus purpose beyond his survivor's guilt. Odin, now 11 years old and moving noticeably slower due to progressive arthritis, split time between Marcus's home and Caleb's foster placement. The German shepherd who'd saved a boy's life had become the bridge connecting 2 people who understood survival looked different for everyone. Sometimes it was completing the mission despite impossible choices. Sometimes it was knowing when to ask for help. Sometimes it was just refusing to walk past something that mattered even when you're tired, broken, and everyone expects you to ignore it. 2 years after the rescue, Marcus attended Caleb's adoption hearing at Deschutes County Courthouse. Caleb's foster family had petitioned to adopt him permanently, providing the stability and safety he'd never experienced. The judge asked Caleb if he understood what adoption meant legally and emotionally. The boy, now 11 and stronger, but still carrying psychological scars no one could see, said, "It means I have a family who won't hurt me and who chose to keep me, like Marcus and Odin found me when I was dying in the snow and didn't walk away even though they didn't have to help me. That's what family does. They don't leave when things are hard." After the hearing, Caleb asked Marcus the question that had been building for 2 years. "Why did you save me? You didn't know me. You could have just called someone from your house and stayed inside where it was warm. Why did you come outside into the cold?" Marcus looked at Odin, who was resting with his head on Caleb's lap with the same protective positioning he'd maintained since finding the boy, and finally spoke the truth he'd been avoiding for 4 years. 4 years ago, during a mission in Syria, I failed to save a little girl who died during a hostage rescue. I've been alone ever since because I couldn't forgive myself for making the tactical call that got her killed. Then Odin found you collapsed in the snow, and I had a choice: repeat my failure by walking away or finish the mission by saving you. You didn't save me, Caleb. But saving you reminded me that warriors don't quit just because they failed once under impossible circumstances. We keep going until we get it right. The boy who almost froze to death found life because a combat German shepherd refused to ignore a threat, and a broken seal discovered that isolation isn't healing. It's just slow surrender disguised as self-protection. Marcus had spent 4 years alone, believing he was too psychologically damaged to help anyone after Syria. Then his K-9 partner found a severely injured child 40 yards outside his cabin and proved that the most important missions don't come with orders, intelligence, briefings, or support assets. They just appear in the snow at 2200 hours and demand you remember who you were trained to be, even when you've forgotten how to be that person anymore. 3 years after the rescue, Marcus works full-time with Oregon Search and Rescue while maintaining his mentorship program for foster children. He's completed comprehensive PTSD treatment and manages his symptoms through therapy, medication, and the purpose Caleb gave him. The Syria girl's face still appears in nightmares occasionally, but Marcus has learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the weight while still moving forward. Odin, now 12 and retired from active work, lives primarily with Caleb's adopted family, where the elderly German shepherd serves as therapy animal for all 3 adopted children. The dog who detected a dying child in the snow proved that military working dogs never truly retire. They just find different missions that matter, different warriors who need protecting, different ways to serve until their final day.